With infinite complacence, people went to and fro over the earth about their little affairs, serene in the assurance of their dominion over this small, spinning fragment of solar driftwood, which by chance or design man has inherited out of the dark mystery of time and space.
On this episode of Into the Fray, I welcome Ray back on with me, and now that his episode has been edited and aired, I do know the title. It is The Shining Part 1, and this is, of course, going to be The Shining Part 2. In that Part 1, we're not going to, of course, go over any of that again. Some of it, of course, we'll touch back on because some things just do tie in, but on that Part 1, we talked about doppelgangers, possible ET abduction scenarios, premonitions, something that someone that I dubbed the humming man, but now that I was thinking on it today, I'm like, he wasn't really humming. He was kind of like singing. So I think I misnamed him, but irregardless, we talked about all kinds of things on that Part 1, and on this Part 2, we have more to cover. And Ray, well, first of all, welcome back. Thank you for coming back on to talk about the rest of your experiences. Yes, I wanted to know if you wanted to address a comment that somebody made on YouTube. I air the show also on YouTube, and by the way, for anybody that has ever spent any time on YouTube, it can be a complete cesspool. So if you are a douche and you leave such a, a douchey comment, I just delete it. It doesn't serve any purpose. This one, it was not douchey. He was actually just, he was making a point maybe and asking a real true question about something that maybe some other people were wondering about. So I was curious if maybe you wanted to address it. And you might have seen it. I know that you hop on YouTube. Sometimes you probably know what I'm going to say, but I will read it for everyone so they know the question. Okay, so the question, or maybe, the comment rather, was, with all due respect to this man's stories, it sounds a lot like mild schizophrenia given his mother's mental health troubles. So one has to wonder whether this is not the obvious explanation. Just referring to, I guess, blanket statement, all of your encounters and your stories that you've already shared with us. So I don't know if you wanted to touch on that or not, but that was a comment, and I loved it because it wasn't disrespectful. It was just coming from...
I thought it was very respectful and a very valid thought. I totally understand why someone would reach that conclusion. And I appreciate whoever wrote that to be as respectful as you were, and I took no offense to it. My only response to that, I guess, for the sake of countering the idea, would be, if you look at the pictures, I'm a Yankee, so we tend to be a little joyfully sarcastic. I was thinking perhaps I need to bring my phone in for therapy. A good portion of the stories involve other people, and I know there's no way to verify anything what I said. And cases like any case is usually not accompanied with any evidence. The pictures that I sent in that could be viewed on Shannon's website should at least give some credence to my claims, where, to me at least, it doesn't appear that they're faked in any way. And honestly, I'm too lazy to do anything fancy to create a hoax. But the pictures, I believe, show that something happened. So you could take everything else I said and lump it into potential mild or any level of schizophrenia. But the pictures, I believe, do tell that there's something out of the ordinary that happened that does, at least in my mind, match my story. So I think and again, like, I'm totally open to skepticism, where I could just have a really great imagination to concoct a story on some weird camera fluke. However, that's not what happened. So I don't know how else to address that, other than I appreciate your respectful tone.
Yeah, I will second that. I do appreciate it. It's essentially an anonymous user, just user and then some numbers, but he does comment on the videos occasionally. I think it's the same gentleman that anytime there's a Bigfoot episode, he writes Bigfoot is so boring. And then he has his profile pic is a Yeti, I think, so it's hilarious.
Wait till he finds one in his backyard, then he can report to us how boring that was.
I'm just wondering if it's actually just him just totally messing with me, and he loves Bigfoot, and it's probably just, being funny. But no, I wanted to second that notion. Thank you for the respectful tone. As I said, YouTube can be a very interesting place. Let's put it nicely.
Yeah, especially considering the nature of what I was sharing, I'm actually surprised there wasn't more scathing comments, because it is like batshit crazy.
Well, that's the nature of every single episode that I cover, Yeah. And if I'm being honest, Ray, there wasn't, it's not like that is a fully edited comment section. I didn't have to, take care of anybody leaving the D-bag comments, by the way. So just wanted you to know that. Yeah.
I appreciate that as
yeah,
well.
if somebody has criticism of me, that's fine. You can say I'm the worst interviewer or you hate my voice. I totally get that. I'll leave those. I don't care about that. It doesn't serve any
voice.
Well, thank you. No, but it doesn't serve anybody to harass someone that has the nuts, and this goes for females too, to get on and share these kinds of experiences. So there, I said it. But thank you for answering the Bigfoot is boring guy. I do appreciate that very much.
Yeah, I totally get it. Well, just to make everyone feel better, when I told my daughter's mom the story of the 2009 UFO episode, she said, or she asked, "Does mental illness run in your family?" And I was like, "Yes, but it doesn't mean this didn't happen."
Right.
So even she, and that's why when we were in Washington Farms, where I'm like, please send something, so they could see something. So yeah, it's like I said, it's expected.
Well, let's continue with this email list, shall we, Ray? So the very next thing is titled Family Destiny.
That is I've been thinking about that, because that is going to be a difficult one to convey verbally, because it involves, are you familiar with the Kabbalah at all?
A little bit. Not a whole lot. So it's up to you if you wanted to talk about that or not. I know that we have plenty of other things to share, so that's up to you.
Yeah, how about we backburner that, because it is very Kabbalistically and mystically technical.
Okay. Sounds like it might need like an entire episode with kind of a backstory and going into Kabbalism and all that stuff. Because if you don't understand it, it might be then hard to understand what you are trying to talk about, right? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's shelve that one.
I would need like a whiteboard and
yeah, I get it. Trust me. I totally understand that. All right. So no, not
how about we substitute that with, I don't mean to throw a surprise at you, but there was this string of events in Louisville that involves a gentleman who, I swear my life is really funny. He was an acquaintance that would frequent this one coffee shop, and he said that I've been chosen, and we went on this long trek that involved him baptizing me in the Ohio River. How's that for a substitute?
Sure.
Okay. It will be kind of interwoven with other things, and I think I could touch on the family destiny thing while avoiding the technicalities that would go, and not to, not have confidence in people's intelligence. It's just, if you're not familiar with this stuff, I might as well speak, Cantonese. So I'll start with like my destiny, where I will include what I had just mentioned, and then involve my what appears to be my daughter and her mom, my sister, her husband and child. So, and my early 30s, I've always been involved in, like, since my 20s, in various mystery schools, a number of Golden Dawn orders I've been a member of. And then in my 30s, early 2000, or actually the year 2000, is when I joined one called the Builders of the Adytum. And they teach Kabbalah, alchemy, hermetics through tarot symbolism. And the founder of the order has published books, and one that I was reading is called The True and Invisible Rosicrucian Order. And at the time, there's going to be a lot of coffee shop references because that's where I was at almost every day. And I was reading that book, waiting for a friend to arrive, and she shows up, and the True and Invisible Rosicrucian Order is an interpretation of two German manuscripts from, I believe, the 1500s that talk about the origin and the founder of the Rosicrucian Order. And it's highly encrypted. And that's what this book does. It goes through each of those manuscripts in great detail, involving gematria, which is taking either Hebrew or Latin letters, their number values, and just where it reveals, even like with the Bible, old alchemy writings, when you approach it with using gematria, a whole other story becomes revealed, and which typically has to do with, these secrets that have to do with reaching enlightenment. And so I'm reading this book, and my friend shows up, and as I get up to leave, I noticed that I was sitting on a little sheet of paper, and I just pick it up, and I don't know how I didn't notice it when I'm sitting on it. It was literally under my ass. And my friend's like, "What's that?" I was like, jokingly, "A message from God." And I slip it in my Rosicrucian book, and we go bebopping around Louisville. So the next day I look at the sheet, and it's torn from a German-American dictionary. And among the list of German words was after Christ. And so the Rosicrucian is a Christian mysticism, a particular order that are considered Christian mystics. I thought, well, that's pretty synchronistic. So within the book, it talks about, one of the things it touches upon is the two Hebrew words. One is the serpent of temptation, and the other is Messiah, which is Nachash and my Hebrew sucks, but regardless, both of those words have the same number value of 358. Out of curiosity, I thought, my full name is Raymond, so I used the Hebrew letter equivalent, and there's an infinite number of ways to transcribe from English to Hebrew. And technically, a good Kabbalist would probably say, you don't do that. It means nothing. However, I did it anyway. And the number value of Raymond added to 853. I thought, well, that's strange. That's the opposite of 358, which is Messiah and the serpent of temptation. I didn't think much of that, just other than like, wow, like a big string of letters, Raymond. It's not a short name, and it just happened to add to the reverse of the number value of Messiah and Nachash. So at work, I do electronic invoicing, and when I'm processing, so like if there's anything wrong with any of the invoices, it'll kick out an error, and I have to go in and manually fix it. And the invoice number of one of the errors was 23666619. And my mind's always, plugged into like the Kabbalistic numerology. And I thought, wow, 23 is the number of the life force. 666, not the number of the beast as everyone thinks it is. It's a solar reference. And I won't get into the reasoning behind that. And then 19, the final two numbers, in tarot, the number, the major arcana, the 19th card is the sun. So it all, like those three sets of numbers really stood out, all meaning solar life force, life power. So when I looked up and it was missing a facility number, and that's why it errored. So when I looked it up, it was our facility in Sedona, Arizona, Kachina Healthcare. And our number for that was 853, which is the number of, Raymond. I was like, okay, that's pretty crazy. Now at the time, a buddy of mine got me into Freemasonry, and I was initiated to Fellowcraft, which was the second degree. And at that time, I was going through a lot of girlfriend drama, so I wasn't really able to focus on doing the memorization and all this stuff. And I frankly didn't care because I was trying to, work through my relationship issues. And my buddy calls me and he said, the lodge said that you're ready for the third degree, which is the Master Mason degree. And so the Master Mason degree is when you assume the role of the Master of Freemasonry, Hiram Abiff, and you assume his role where you are betrayed, murdered, and raised. And any of my Freemasonic brothers out there, I'm sorry if I'm giving away secrets. So what didn't make sense is I didn't go through the proficiency exam to be eligible for third degree, but for some reason they said, yeah, he did it. And I know I didn't do it. So I went through with it anyway. And I was raised May 2004. And so I go, and it was the coolest ritual ever. Like, I wish I could redo that, and I won't go into detail about it. So at the end so symbolically, I was betrayed, murdered, and raised. And does that sound familiar?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So at the end of the ritual, they give you your lambskin apron and your cool little lot that I don't even know what it's called. It's a little blue book. And then your due card saying you're paid up for the year. And I look on the due card, and I guess like when they issue them, they have some sort of log where it's like numerical. So the first one was probably 00001, next one 0002. Mine was 0853. And this is all like within like a few weeks. So my name, the Wasserstrom invoice, and again, I know that people are like, this dude is reaching, but it all seems to, and not to mention, and I didn't arrange any of this. So in 2004, I was 33 years old, which is, again, who do you know that was betrayed, murdered, and raised at 33 years old?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So and again, I'm not buying it, but I'm still like putting it all together, like how it's coinciding. And so, like I said in the last interview, I know what it's implying, but there's no way in hell I'm going to like accept what this is saying. But it's not there but things tend to continue. So meanwhile, the guy that I referred to earlier, he's someone that we all knew this guy, and he kind of snapped one day, abruptly quit his job, just buried himself in the Bible. And he would always like just talk so intensely, and it was fascinating, but he's one of those guys that you can only take in small doses because he's too intense. But it's always fascinating. And he would always say, like, he would always offer me protein bars. Like, do you want a protein bar? I'm like, no, thanks. He's like, God provides. I just find these. I'm like, all right, dude, I appreciate it, but I don't want a protein bar. And so weird things would happen around this guy. Like one time he was at the coffee shop with another friend of mine, and I just get there after work, and he says, my angel told me that when the magician looks at himself, or when the fool looks at himself, he becomes the magician. And then he said, because the fool is numbered 0 in tarot, and the magician has an infinity sign above his head. So the two zeros looking at each other creates the infinity sign. I thought, well, that's actually pretty cool. And then my buddy T, who was with him, says, holy shit, look. And we look up in the sky. There are no clouds except one in the shape of an infinity symbol. Like right after. Now, the guy that I'm referring to where crazy stuff happens, I'll refer to him as S. You'd see him every now and then. And he comes up to me on another day and he said, I had a vision. And he always refers to his angel. He's like, my angel told me to go into this. It sounds so crazy. He's like, my angel told me to go into this shed and fast and meditate. And I was given a vision, and I was shown a list of names, and it was just scrolling down, and your name showed up, and it was by the name Didymus, who was doubting Thomas. And I like the guy, so I'm going to maintain being polite, but this is just like absolutely nuts. And he was telling me that you're like Didymus, doubting Thomas, where and I didn't tell this S guy anything of like the number stuff, the Freemason stuff. And he says, when doubting Thomas stuck his finger in the wound, he became Christ. And he said, you're Didymus. I'm like, okay, man, that sounds good. I'm Didymus. And then he says, I need to baptize you. I'm like, that sounds good. Okay, I'm Didymus who needs baptism. So I at that time, I'm like, I got to avoid this guy. And he would like leave stuff on my doorstep to my apartment, like notes. And it was getting creepy. And I was doing a great job avoiding him. And then this one Saturday, about 10 a.m., I opened my door. I was about to go. He's standing right there. And he said, what are you doing? And I could not come up with the lie quick enough. So I said, nothing. And he's like, do you have olive oil? I'm like, I believe I do. He's like, grab it. Let's go. So, and this is in an area called the Highlands in Louisville. We walk from there all the way into Jeffersonville, Indiana, which is basically right across the bridge when you get to downtown. But it is a hell of a walk. I mean, it was like, maybe 2 hours walking there. And yeah, like I just couldn't get out of it. So I'm like, fine, let's see what the hell's gonna, is going on. So we get to the 2nd Street Bridge, and there's this enormous praying mantis on the railing, and which was kind of bizarre. And he's like, oh, that's a good sign. I was like, yeah, that is kind of cool. We get into Indiana, and then he says, now you lead the way. I'm like, what do you mean lead the way? He's like, just walk. And I'm like, okay. So just like whatever you feel. And like we're in this little neighborhood, this cute little neighborhood with, regular houses and stuff. So I'm essentially walking randomly, and he's behind me. And I'm just thinking, we have to look insane. Like this, I wouldn't be surprised if someone called the cops on us, because he looked kind of nutty. And so we start seeing these pamphlets. I don't know if you've ever seen, like, if there's a church that they have these little pamphlets that have some scripture on it, and it'll have the pastor of that church. So we start seeing these every once in a while on the ground. He picks it up and he says, I think you're supposed to read this. So I'm like, all right. So, and while walking aimlessly while he's behind me, so I'm reading it in my head. He's like, no, read it out loud. I'm like, oh, this is getting better. So I'm like walking in this neighborhood, reading this pamphlet out loud while this strange dude is behind me. And then we'd see another pamphlet. It's like, okay, I think that means you need to stop reading that and begin reading that. So this goes on for a bit, like maybe a half hour. No chance of sanity returning to this moment. Like we're in the deep end of weird crap. So we continue finding these pamphlets. So then I stop and I begin, and I get to this one. The final pamphlet said something like, "If you've been baptized but not in Jesus' name, you need to be rebaptized in Jesus' name." And then S shouts, "Stop walking!" I'm like, what? The moment that I read that, apparently, when there's like a road crew and they'll paint like numbers and stuff. I think it was a gas company actually. Like on the street, it's like painted in orange, bright orange.
Mm-hmm.
So he shouts stop, and I'm standing right above one of these areas where there was a road crew there, and there's numbers. I don't remember what the number is. He pulls a Bible out of his uh, cargo pants, and he goes to, I think it was something in Corinthians. I'm not good with the Bible. And he goes to the number that I am standing on, and and he reads it right from the Bible, and it is, "If you've been baptized but not in Jesus' name, you need to be rebaptized in Jesus' name." And I just happened to be stepping on the number of that verse in the Bible as I read it from a randomly found pamphlet. And I have to throw this in there. I apologize for this, Shannon, because I know this is a tough one to try to wrap into any neat package. Then we go to the Ohio, which is, everyone knows that you should never put any body part in the Ohio. And yet we were frolicking in there, getting happy with the Holy Spirit, apparently. So after that, we head to the Ohio, and he baptizes me with my little bottle of olive oil. And then he leaves. Is like, "I think we should part now." And he just like leaves me there. So I'm like 2-hour walk away from my house in Jeffersonville. So, and then he says, "You need to read Revelations in order to activate your chakras." And he's like, "Just read the entirety of Revelations." I'm like, "Okay, I will do that." And I didn't do that. I actually tried. I'm like, I don't get this stuff. So I didn't even bother. So a year goes by. Out of the blue, the morning before work, I had this thought. I need to do what S said, just out of curiosity. What's going to happen if I read Revelations? So I started reading that morning, and like at least a year had gone by, and I put no thought into it until then. So I go into work, to refer back to the first video. My friend who is friends with Brett Butler, he comes up to me. He's like, "Hey, come over to my desk. I have something to show you." Because he was looking at, there was some preacher who, this church in the area, where whenever you would have a sermon, there'd always be these like huge orbs, like clearly something spiritual going on. So he shows me, and it turned out to be the pastor of the church of the pamphlets I read when S and I were in Indiana. Like a whole year goes by. I don't think about S. I didn't think about him at all. And then the morning I decide I'm going to give the Revelations thing a shot. My buddy, my office friend, shows me a picture of the preacher from the church where those pamphlets were from, which I apparently were in Indiana. So that was just a lot of strange coincidences. Is there anything, like, I know this one, like this batch of stories might seem a little dry. Do you want to continue, or would you want to go to the list or something?
I mean, if there's more that you needed to add to this, you can. I definitely, I mean, besides all the obvious tie-ins, I mean, the fact that you attained the 3rd degree, as you mentioned, and you technically shouldn't have been able to do that without going through their protocols. That was one thing that definitely stood out to me, because it seems like with their protocols and rituals, they seem like they would be strict with that kind of a thing.
I would imagine, I mean, naturally, I couldn't tell. And I was a crappy Mason. I never went to meetings. And, again, relationship issues. But they said I was eligible. Let's see where I leave off. Friend, show me the preacher. So that's just more like synchronistic stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so every once in a while, like at the time, I was a member of a Golden Dawn group, and my contact within that group informs me I have to, or I don't have to, they are like schisming. Like all the officers in the group were like, so and so is crazy. We're going to start our own group and you're invited. I'm like, sure. And it was called like Ordo Ignis Arcani, like Order of the Hidden Fire. So I'm like, sure, I'll roll with this. So, and, I liked my contact. She was helpful. And when I switched over to that group, they, like a lot of Golden Dawn and a lot of magical groups, they encourage you to pick a magical motto. And I picked the Greek for Son of the Widow. And because technically, when we get to the part about my father and stuff, because there's a lot of meaning behind everything with that. And along with all the hints that I was given with the numbers and stuff. Because it seemed like I'm not, which might sound like I'm actually embracing it. So maybe a portion of me is embracing it, but not interpreting it as if I'm the second helping of Christ, But I think there is something saying that I was on the correct path to achieve Christ consciousness, enlightenment. So to me, it was more, I am doing what I'm supposed to do to reach the enlightenment as it's described in the Western mystery tradition. So like that's how, I mean, not in the beginning, because I'm like, what in the hell? Like I even told my friend who vouched for me, because he knows a lot about all of that esoterics and stuff. And so if I could go back to the initiations, so there were 3 degrees. It's called the Blue Lodge, and you're hoodwinked or blindfolded, and there's a part in each of the degrees where you go and you kneel and you put your hand on the Bible, and each time, so like the first degree, the second I put my hand on the Bible, I see my own eyes, like like a vision of my own eyes looking back at me, but they were mine, but like it seemed like it would be my higher self. There was no face. It was just my own eyes looking back at me. Beneath the blindfold, I could open my eyes and like close them, just like when I saw that boy in New York, where I go up to him and I'm like rubbing my eyes and re-looking. That's what I was doing with my own eyes. And it was just really peculiar. And my friend, I told him about the experience. I was like, no, that's never happened to me. And the same thing happened, and I'd forget. So second degree, hand on the Bible, boom, my eyes. It's like a switch. And then third degree, again, forgetting what happened in first and second degree, hand on the Bible, my eyes again. And it was and there was intelligence. There was like this intelligence to them. It's hard to describe. And power, I'd say, like power and intelligence. And it wasn't my imagination, because like all 3 times I didn't expect it. And, it didn't fade at all. Like when I tried to like blink and close my eyes, reopen them, it maintained its clarity. So back to Ordo Ignis Arcani, I picked Son of the Widow, which in Freemasonry, I believe Hiram is called the widow's son. So it's not exactly the right wording, but so it's more almost like a paraphrase of it. And so I picked in ancient Greek, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but it was huios teskeros. So during that period, while I'm a member of this order, I'm in my bedroom, I'm doing like some yogic exercises, and I see on my bookshelf an old copy of Lord of the Flies. And I've never read the book. It's just, it was on my bookshelf. But it stood out because I guess the publisher had a little symbol of the planet Saturn. I was like, I think I'm supposed to look at that. And I just pick it up. And you know how you do like bibliomancy where you open up a book randomly? So I open the book and I just point at the first word, and it was Percival or Parsival. I can't remember the character's name because I haven't read the book, but it was that name. And I thought, I think there's some mystical significance of that, but I don't mystical magical significance, but I couldn't recall. And I go out into the living room because I'm about to meet a friend of mine. And so I go into the living room and I brought Aleister Crowley's Book of Thoth with me because I knew my friend was going to be late. So I thought I'd bring some reading. The second I step into the living room, I hear on the TV loud, Percival! And not even 30 seconds after I read Percival in the Lord of the Flies book, and my roommates, K and E, we remember them, they were watching Scrubs where someone was yelling at Dr. Percy and screamed his name, Percival. The second I saw, yet another like synchronistic thing. So like that's another thing I just kind of stow in. Okay, things are revealing themselves. Don't know what it means. I get to the coffee shop to wait for my friend. I have the Book of Thoth with me, and I open that book randomly, not even intentionally. I just open it up to a paragraph on Parsival. So I'm thinking, what the hell's up with Parsival? So I go into one of my Crowley books, and there's I think it's Magic in Theory and Practice, and he has tables. And I found Percival, and it's linked to the widow's son, which is my magical motto, Son of the Widow. And I didn't know any of it. I didn't put any of that together because there are tons of correspondences within the ritual magic and Golden Dawn. And so all this was in one evening. And to me, it links to all the other stuff with the Freemasons and the Rosicrucian book. They're all tied together. And again, I'm not looking for it. It's just stuff that seems to happen, that it gets my attention, because I'm not trying to look for the next synchronicity and hope it ties into this whole idea that I have.
Well, but speaking of, and this will be a subject change, but speaking of synchronistic dates, let's talk about your dad, right? Because that was the next thing on the list.
Yeah. That's so. When I was 18, even when I was 14, I moved in with my aunt and uncle, and they were young. They were 19 and 20. But based on how miserable my life was with my mom, it broke my aunt's heart. So she offered to take me in, and I took her up on it. And so we, at 18, and now I mentioned how my dad was absent. He lived in New York, and right around when I was 13, 14 is when I would go visit him in New York every summer. And that's all I got to see him. And so 18, I'm still living with my aunt and uncle, and we were in Florida visiting my uncle there, which is my aunt's brother. And we get back from Disney World, and my uncle tells me, why don't you go take a shower and get ready for bed? And I'm like, I'm 18. You don't tell me what to do. But I was like, I'm tired. I probably should do that. And when I get in the shower, I hear my aunt just bawling, crying, like an explosion of sobbing. And I thought it was her mom, my grandmother. And I go out there, and they said that your dad was murdered. And the only thing I was told is that it was his girlfriend's ex-boyfriend, and that they caught him 10 minutes after it happened. And that was a huge blow. And so 14 years later, I guess it was 2003, because this happened in 1989. And I'm at work, living in Louisville. And I had this random thought: whatever happened to the guy that killed my dad? And so I emailed the Suffern, New York Police Department, because that's where he was living, and just saying, hey, I don't know what you're permitted to reveal or to give me, but my dad was murdered April 23rd, 1989. And, he knew like everybody. I was like, you may have known him. And can you give me any information you have on the guy? Like, was he still in prison? So I didn't hear for months, not too many months, like just a few months. And I finally get an email back from Lieutenant Nugent. And there was a couple attachments of the police report. And he typed a paragraph, and it was very thoughtful, like, he's like, I'm sorry that you lost your dad so suddenly like that. And he said, George Daly, the guy who killed your father, he was up for parole March of the following year, which is 2004, but he died in prison July 23rd this year, 2003. And I was like, that's crazy. And so then it dawned on me, I was like, well, when did I email that? And I emailed it July 23rd, 2003. I emailed 14 years after. I emailed the Suffern, New York Police Department the day the guy dies in prison. And I even have it printed out, but I don't have it on me. And I left some stuff back in Louisville when I moved here. So like the police report and the emails. So, and this is where it gets interesting, because like it's tragic, and like I know it might seem tasteless to place that event into all the other stuff that I had just said. But at the time, I was reading a book by Robert Anton Wilson called Cosmic Trigger Volume 1. Are you familiar with him at all?
No.
So he is big into he's very much into Aleister Crowley, Timothy Leary, orgone stuff, quantum physics. And so I'm reading, and at the time that this happened, I'm reading that book, Cosmic Trigger Volume 1. And are you familiar with the 23 phenomena? There's a movie with Jim Carrey that addressed that.
Yeah.
So most people probably didn't realize that movie was based on a lot of the writings of Robert Anton Wilson. Especially, I think it was something in the Illuminatus trilogy is when it was referenced. So the Cosmic Trigger book, I was reading that July 23rd is the beginning of Dog Days. And according to this book, he said that is when the Egyptians would communicate with Osiris, who lived in the Sirius star system. And so I'm reading that. It's like July 23rd. That's when I emailed who turned out to be Lieutenant Nugent. And then I was starting to think like of all the other stuff. When I was reading the police report, which is highly disturbing, because it kind of like, even 14 years after it, I kind of plugged into the emotions of when it happened. So it was pretty difficult. And so the guy who shot him was a Scorpio. And I'm like, okay, Ray's about to reach again. So when you put it all together, so my dad was named Ray as well. So he was like Big Ray, I was Little Ray. And since I'm steeped in Golden Dawn stuff at this time, there's within that the pantheon that's used in a lot of the rituals, there's a formula that's used called the analysis of the keyword, and it's Virgo, Isis, Mighty Mother, Scorpio, Apophis, Destroyer, Soul, Osiris, Slain and Risen. And so it identifies, so Osiris was also betrayed by his brother Seth, murdered, and raised where the Horus takes his place to avenge his father's death, to fight evil. If so, when I'm thinking we're both named Ray, I mean, of course it's Raymond, but we're referred to as Ray. So there's like father, son, son, son. My father was killed by the Scorpio Force, which is all part of the Golden Dawn formula, because Scorpio, Apophis, destroyer, the murderer of Osiris within that story. Again, I know it's reaching, but it's still like, and especially after all the 23s involved in, where my dad was killed on April 23rd, then July 23rd, which matches Robert Anton Wilson's book, in the year 2003, which is another 23. So I'm getting bombarded with these 23s. And then there are relations, like a relationship with, the astrological sign of the guy, along with who he killed. And then here I am. And then if we go back to, the dreams and all that stuff in the last one, where it's, destined to fight evil. And I know, like, I'm probably losing a lot of people by now, but this is just what I've gathered as I've gone through this particular very large, confusing string of circumstances. So I think that's all regarding me. But then when we get to my daughter, and this is where I wish I had a white.
Well, let's not go too far down there. Then let's.
Yeah. So, in a nutshell, she is a Libra with the Pisces moon with an Aries rising, which happens to be the same sun and moon sign of both Aleister Crowley, Paul Foster Case, the founder of the Builders of the Attitude that I was involved with, which, like, okay, big deal. So, yeah, I apologize. I don't know how to wrap this up.
No, that's okay. That's all right. No, I mean, hey, it's a lot of really strange and cool and unusual synchronicities, especially with the numbers. You've got the 23s, you've got 853 and 358, and of course, I'm so sorry about your father. I can't even imagine having a loved one have their lives end like that. I can't imagine the anger and the rage and just the confusion and pain. So I'm so sorry about that, Ray. No, thank you for sharing all of that, of course. So one of the next things on the list, though, deals with what sounds like a very profound psychic named Tilly.
Yeah, so Tilly, she was part of I believe they were a gypsy family that would randomly appear in Louisville, and then they would disappear, like giving like psychic readings and stuff. And they were kind of mysterious. And I actually got a reading from them a couple times, and they were like very accurate. And again, they disappear, reappear, disappear, and then reappear. And I get a reading with Tilly, and she starts yelling at me. Like, I didn't tell her anything, and she was like, you were supposed to go to where it's colder, but you gave your money away. And at the time, my ex in Boston worked for the Blue Man Group, and she's like, you have to audition for these guys. I'm like, I'm not going to audition for them. And she talked me into it. And there's even a story that goes into that. I think I've been blabbering enough, so I'll just stick with this. And she was right, because like at the time I was dating this girl who she was like going to lose her apartment. And so all the money I was saving to go up to New York to audition, I gave to her. Well, Tilly yelled at me about it. And all this other stuff, like when my dad died, I had a lot of money from the insurance, and I didn't blow it. It's just that I didn't invest it. I'm not good with money. And she's like, and you were foolish with the money. I said nothing. And she's like yelling at me. So again, she disappears. Then I moved to Georgia, and then I have to move back to Louisville. I bump into her in the Highlands area, and we were just chatting. It wasn't a reading. And I mentioned about my mom having mental illness. She said she wasn't mentally ill. She had demons. And so then all the stuff like with the Monroe, New York apartment, I kind of suspected, but when you get Tilly confirmation, it kind of seals it in my mind. So that was a short one.
Yeah, and for anybody wondering, of course, just really quick, Ray, you know, a lot of this ties into what we talked about on part 1, you know, with his mom and everything. We're not going to redo all of that. You guys can go back to part 1 if you wanted to hear what the kinds of things that Ray had going on in his home as a child. Not easy. But yeah, what were you going to say, Ray?
It wasn't relevant to my particular stories. They're just like little side funny things that have nothing to do with my experiences. So I'll not continue with that. Just to keep it brief. Well, okay. So my friend, the friend of Fred, Brett Butler, he's like really into psychics and stuff. And I was like, you have to see this woman. She yelled at me, you know. So I took him to see her. And he's a gay man. He comes out. I was excited, and he said, "She told me I'd find the woman of my dreams," and like that was it. so I was like, because like she was so accurate with when she was chastising me for my life's mistakes,
right?
And then so it was a little. I wasn't expecting.
Little misstep there on her part.
Yeah.
Unless you call him and he's like, "Hey, I am married to a woman now, and I'm very happy." You never know, I guess.
That is never gonna happen. That is not. So, if I know
Tilly, maybe a little misstep there. All right, so you have a Hat Man story on the list here.
I had a little apartment in Scranton before I joined the Navy. My friend Elle, she would stay with me every once in a while. And well, first we were going to see Robert Plant in Binghamton, New York one night, just a group of my friends. And Elle was, you know, staying at my place so we could all leave together. And we ended up staying up too late. And I was like, oh, we're going to be exhausted to see Robert Plant. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to guide you through a meditation because that's supposed to, like, I'm like 19 at the time, so I don't know anything about anything. I'm just like getting into this stuff. I was like, I'll guide you through a meditation, and that should be equivalent to 8 hours sleep because that's what a book said. So I turn off the lights. I start guiding her through this meditation, and it's pitch black in this tiny little basement apartment. And she just starts screaming at the top of her lungs. Wasn't expecting that. So I'm trying to find the light, and I turn it on, and she like has this look of horror on her face, and she's looking around saying, "They're laughing at us." And I'm like, "Who, Elle?" And she's like, "You don't feel them?" I'm like, "I don't feel anything." And she's freaking me out. So, and no drugs were involved. Throwing it out there. Not that night. So we're both frazzled. Long story short, from that moment, weird things would happen in that apartment. And like I used to work at Domino's Pizza, and she would just crash at my place. And she calls me, and she's like, "You have to take me home." I'm like, "Why?" And she's like, "The water just turned on by itself." And I thought she was, you know, full of crap. And so I take her home. And then stuff would happen. Like I'd see these little gray white blobs, like just kind of whiz by, like ground level. And so Elle, on another night, she was sleeping on my couch, and I was working. I'd worked till like 3 a.m. And she opens her eyes, and she sees all this light coming out of the closet. And she thinks I'm like standing in there wearing, I had a long leather coat. It was like a wide brimmed hat. And she just thought it was me, thinking, why the hell's Ray standing there? Not why is there all this goddamn light coming out of the closet?
Right.
But why is Ray standing there? So this was like all around the time, like after that time. So I don't know if I had opened up something, trying to bring into the meditative state. So that's when, and this was like 1990, 91, where I have never heard of Hat Man, not till years later, till like, the internet and, YouTube videos talking about it. I was like, man, they are describing, what I had seen. So that's the Hat Man story.
Yeah, those are always disquieting to hear, and I can't imagine actually seeing one of those dudes. That would not be cool at all, and it's usually in someone's house. A lot of times when you're supposed to be sleeping or, feeling safe, and there they show up. So next up is Billzebub.
This is one of my favorites to me. So when I got out of the Navy, moved to Louisville, and I would hang out at Barnes & Noble all the time. I go to the New Age section, and there's this, I'm 28 at the time, so I'm semi-young. And this older guy, probably like in his 40s, he's in that aisle, and he has an armful of books. And I know the one was called Laya Yoga, and there looked like an Aleister Crowley book in the little stack under his arm. And I asked, is that a Crowley book? And the guy, and I was a little shocked because he seemed well-to-do, and like out of all the people that I knew that were into Crowley, like you don't expect someone who's well-to-do digging into Crowley at all. So he looks to the left, like at me, and as soon as he looks at me, I get shoved. Like I describe it like, when you're underwater, your friend like kind of whumps the water and it makes you like it shoves you back a little in a wave. I don't know if that's described well. That's what happened to me in the aisle in Barnes and Noble. Like the moment he looked at me, I was shoved back a little. So I said, is that a Crowley book? So we talked for like 2 hours, and the guy was apparently a member of a German occult order. And at the time I was with the Rosicrucian Amorc, and of which I'm a member again now. But at the time I was probably maybe a year into it. So we were talking about that, and he introduced himself as Bill. Then he recommended that I get a book called Initiation into Hermetics by Franz Barden, because they were working on a new translation from German that was supposed to be better quality than, I guess, the previous translations. So I'm like, cool, that sounds great. And I had this feeling like when we were talking about it, I was like, I want this guy to like be not a guru, but like I feel like I could learn from this guy. But he didn't seem well. He has a student, some girl, who said, you need to take on a new student, and I got excited because I thought that must be me, and it wasn't. So we just part ways. So I immediately put an order in at this local bookstore, Carmichael's in Louisville, which is right next door to the coffee shop. So it was very convenient. So I put in an order for the book, and month by month I'm checking, because I was friends with the people that owned and worked at the bookstore. And they're like, no, Merker Publishing they're still not releasing it yet. It's still being translated. So like 7 months go by, and I'm just like, it'll get here when it gets here. Because I was really excited, especially with the whole weird encounter with Billzebub. And that's what, so for years I would tell the story of Billzebub, like how I got shoved by his mind in the middle of Barnes and Noble. And it was just an interesting story, especially like what happens next, so I give up on pestering my Carmichael's friends. And at the time I was working with astral projection, or attempting to do so. And if anyone wants to, like, an easy way to succeed with that, I was working with a book called Out of Body Adventures by, I think it's Richard Stack, something Stack. It makes it practically effortless, at least in my experience. So I was working with that book. I was lying down to go to sleep one night, And I wasn't even trying to astral project. I was just giving myself suggestions to remember my dreams. Then my entire body starts vibrating as if it's hooked up to a strong electrical current. And based on everything that I've read, I'm like, holy shit, it's happening. And I wasn't even trying. So I roll to my right, or I try to, and I literally feel my astral body separate from my physical body. So this was like the first and only time this has ever happened from a fully conscious state. So I'm hovering a few feet above my body, and my arms are astral arms, that is, are outstretched, kind of like Superman, and I'm just floating. And it was exhilarating. So I fly through the wall into my kitchen living room area, and there's a guy there with curly, wavy blonde hair, almost shoulder length, had a brown jacket on, and I had such profound love for him for no reason. And it felt like simultaneously, I don't know this guy, but I feel like I do. But there was such this love that I was like feeling pouring out of me to him. And he says, the pamphlets will be here soon. And I asked, for some reason, I interpreted it that as the Franz Barden book. So I asked, do you mean the Franz Barden book? And he didn't answer me. And then I remembered all my ritual magic stuff is like, you have to test these entities. So I threw out a Yod Hey Vav Hey. You know, if he was a bad guy, he was supposed to flee, as what happened on another occasion. And he didn't. He cocked an eyebrow and he kind of smirked. And I was thinking, well, did I do that wrong? Or is he a good guy? So I'm like, I am not taking a chance. So I flew upward and visited a thelemic magician friend of mine. And then that's where things got weird and more dreamlike. So it was hard to maintain the conscious focus. So the next day, I'm at the coffee shop with my friends. I remember going into this like almost like a trance. And I just almost like robotically said, I'm going to go to Carmichael's. And I remember like the fuzziness in my head as I'm walking in there. And I go to the, I believe it was the philosophy section, which I never go to. And I pick up this book that's wrapped in plastic that's on the shelf, not even looking at it. I pull it off, and it's the book that I had ordered. It's Initiation into Hermetics by Franz Barden. And then I got angry because I'm like, you guys didn't call me, and you didn't keep it behind the desk or the counter, so anyone could have picked it up. But then, you know, when I thought about it, I was like, but it wouldn't have been as cool if it happened any other way. And so now I had this book. I don't touch it for 5 years. I was so excited to have this book. I'm like, where the hell's the book? Where the hell's the book? And then I don't touch it for 5 years. 5 years down the road, I'm like, I have to start practicing. So this book is basically 10 steps, I guess you could say, where you have to master everything in each step before progressing. And it is very intense magical instruction. So if anyone wants to acquire magic powers, I don't think you could do much better than that book. So I'm finally like, I'm buckling down. I'm going to start practicing. So I start going through the exercises and meditations and all the stuff. And 12 days into it, I'm in the Highlands area, because that's where I lived and that's where we all hung out. And as I'm crossing the street, Bardstown Road, I see my roommate on the corner, and I'm halfway across the road. And as I'm waving to my roommate P at this time, I had a bunch of roommates in my life. As I'm waving to him, Billzebub is crossing the street. So like we pass each other. Like 12 days into me finally practicing, 5 years, I just happened to be passing Billzebub, and he was with this woman. So I do a weird U-turn because my roommate is like, all I see is you make this weird face as you're waving, and you do this weird U-turn as you follow this couple. And I catch up to them. I was like, excuse me, is your name Bill? He's like, no, sorry. And they just keep going. And I'm like, there's no way, because the dude had such a distinct look, mainly his haircut. He had a haircut that I've never seen on anybody. So I knew this had to have been Billzebub. So I'm like, I can't, I will kick myself if I don't at least talk to him. So I run up to him. I was like, I apologize for, disturbing you, but you and I had a conversation like 5 years ago at Barnes and Noble, and you mentioned, you recommended this book, and I just started practicing. And he says, you have a really great memory. And he's like, I didn't even tell him like when. He said, it's interesting because that conversation that we had popped into his head. He said like around 2 weeks ago, which is right around the time I started practicing from that book. And so, and the woman that was with him, she did not look pleased that I was interfering with their evening. So we part ways. And you know what I did? I stopped practicing the book. I got distracted with other stuff. And after all that, and I get frustrated with myself because I have these things that I set for myself. You're going to go through the book. So a whole year goes by because I get sidetracked with a lot of like the other studies and practices. A lot of Golden Dawn stuff tends to yank me away from, especially the Barden book. So another year goes by. I get frustrated with myself and I'm like, damn it, you're going to go through this. Again, another like 10 days or so, I'm into the book. And I go into another restaurant to get a carryout order. And I had the book on me. And the server there was asking me, what are you reading? And I tell her, and she's like, how'd you find out about that book? And I just glanced behind me, and Billzebub is eating dinner right behind me with the woman with another couple. And I was like, that guy right there, so like this guy kept showing up right around the time that I would be so far into the practices of this book. First one was, a 5-year difference or a 5-year span. And then when I was goofing off with other stuff, a year, and then he just happened to end. I never continued with the book, and it frustrates me because it feels like with all these crazy things that surround it, it feels like I need to be practicing, but I just haven't jumped back into it.
So what kind of haircut did he have? Like the owner of the Raiders, like that, or something different?
I don't know what the owner. That's football, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know anything about
once
sports.
Once we hop off the call, just Google the owner of the Raiders. I forget his name, but just to see it because it's funny. But yeah,
it's not quite a bowl, but it's almost like it's not neatly cut straight across.
Yeah.
So it gives it kind of like a choppy look.
Okay.
I don't know.
This guy doesn't have the choppy look, so.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so it's like if I don't want to presume that he's wealthy, but he, like I said, he looks well to do, and I don't make that much money, and I try to have a haircut that I don't want to insult Billzebub. Oh, I forgot. When he said that his name wasn't Bill, he said his name was Ted. So I'm thinking,
Bill and
like,
Ted?
well, that's what's funny, because like then I'm thinking, my first thought was, because I take pride in my memory. I have a really good memory. I was like, there's no way in hell that I heard that wrong. And then it like kind of messed up the years of calling him Billzebub and the whole Bill and Ted thing. So I don't know if he gave me a false name or I remembered incorrectly, or if Ted wasn't his real name, if he just continually, but I had never experienced something where my memory was that far off.
I mean, Ray, honestly, if you can't trust a guy that is holding Crowley books and then can mentally push you without touching you, who are you going to trust? You know, I mean, come on. I don't think you should put that on you. I'm sorry. The guy gave you a couple different names. I'm not really surprised sitting over here right now. I'm just saying, you know, when you step back and you forest for the trees, you're like, yeah, Tedzebub does not have the same ring as Billzebub. That's funny. I like that. It doesn't work as well, but I don't think you should be so hard on yourself. I think that he might not have been, you know,
I mean,
a human.
I'm cool with
so
I'm more cool with him deceiving me than a faulty memory of mine.
I hear you. All right. I like that. All right. So next up is a Glitter Man encounter.
Oh, yeah. So my second duty station was a carrier group in Norfolk, Virginia. So we would be on shore for a few months. Then we'd go out for 30 days with the battle group into the Caribbean, then fly back to Virginia and repeat the process and with a different carrier, with a different battle group. And so while we're in the building, so we just, worked. It was just a small building with offices, and I worked in the admin office. And so every once in a while, like military people know about standing watch. So our watch was done where it would rotate, between like all the enlisted people, non-chief. So you'd have to work the whole day, and then you had to stay in the building while everyone went home. And we had a little watch room that had a fold-out bed and a TV. And so you'd have to just stay there, and every hour you'd have to walk through the little command and check all the safes. And it was creepy as hell because, when I would like go through so it was like there were 2 floors. So upstairs there was like maybe 5 offices, and downstairs there was like a big open area with some offices. And so I'd have to check the safes to make sure they're locked, and you have to write them down. You'd have to log it every hour until 10 p.m. And it was creepy because when I would walk, I would see like someone in the air or the ops area. It was like a little open area with desks, and you'd see out of the corner of your eye like these tall, slender beings. Like they would like glide by, but it would be out of the corner of your eye, and you'd look, and there's nothing there. So you're like, did I see something? Or now my friend E, he when he stood watch, I told him about it. He's like, oh yeah, that place is haunted. So he was standing watch, and his boyfriend came, which is a big no-no back then. His boyfriend came to visit him with his dog, Roscoe. We'll call him R. Sorry, that was cheesy. So E sees a little like gray blob on the ground whiz by out of the corner of his eye, and he noticed that Roscoe, his head whipped in the same direction that E saw the thing zip by. So that was his experience. And so I'm like, great, it's haunted. Now this one evening, it's maybe like 7 p.m., so I'm not tired, and I'm in the watch room, and there's a doorway that opens into the open area I was talking about. And I'm reading a book, and I just look up through the doorway. I see it's as if it was gliding while invisible, and it kind of faded into being visible as it was gliding through the door into the watch room or where I was. And it continued. So this figure, it was a definite outline of head, shoulders, like the arms weren't apart. So it was like head, shoulders, and it went to maybe mid-thigh where there was nothing below that. So it fades in right before it hits, like gets to the doorway, and it slowly passes me, maybe like 3 feet in front of me. So this is like close, and I'm looking right at it. And it was and I've heard other people describe the predator when it goes invisible. That's what it was. And like only the past year I've heard it being referred to as Glitter Man. So it sounds like Glitter Man. So it continued towards the emergency exit and then fades as it continued to glide. And I thought, this is a perfect time for a smoke break. But I had to go through the emergency exit where this thing kind of glided to. So I quickly try to go in that direction, and I walk through this pocket of the iciest air, and it's not like a normal, like cold. It feels like every molecule is frozen and shaken. So I pick up my pace and I go out there and have my cigarette, and then very reluctantly go back to the watch room and resume my watch. And I don't believe I slept at all that night. So that's the Glitter Man.
Who could blame you there, right? And you're like, oh, damn it, for wanting to have a smoke, too.
Yeah. A lot of conflicting thoughts.
You're like, I do, but I don't, because the thing's over there. Yeah, those Glimmer Man stories, I love those. I mean, once the name Glitter Man came out, did you go on a heavy look-see online to find out if anybody else has seen it?
No, I'm satisfied with my experience.
Yeah.
But like, I do kind of stash it in my mind when I hear other people's stories.
Right.
Because it is like very recent that I've heard it referred to as Glitter Man. Like,
right.
Maybe within the year. When I would describe it, I would just use the Predator description.
Mm-hmm. Right. Right. And those could be easily interchangeable. Right. So.
Yeah, like I find it interesting, like when I hear other people's stories and they'll include little details that I'm like, yeah, like that's like I know it's like I would be referring to the previous interview, and I'll avoid that. But just it happens where there'll be these little details that I know that were part of other experiences that I've had.
Right.
And it's just kind of neat when you don't need the confirmation, but it feels good to get it.
So let's close with some Iceland talk. I'm very much looking forward to listening about this because you were actually stationed in Iceland and you guys were staying in some haunted barracks.
Yeah. There's kind of a lot to this story. Not too much. It'll probably be a good thing to close with. So I get stationed to Iceland. And so you check in and there's a barracks petty officer that checks you in and stuff. So after a few months, my friend C, who she was new, so she just arrives. So like whenever there's like new people, you introduce yourself and, they either do or don't become a friend or an acquaintance of some sort. So C, we became friends and she's from Louisville. And this is before I've ever stepped foot in Louisville. So she's the reason, like part of the reason why I moved to Louisville, because I dated her friend from Louisville in Virginia. And that's what brought me to Louisville. Irrelevant, but just a little detail. So C comes to my room and she's like, is it possible for a ghost to follow you? I was like, I suppose so. I don't think they're really bound by anything. And she said that and this is in the middle of the day, she said that she was on the top bunk. We call them racks. So it's a bunk bed. She's like, I'm on the top rack, and she was getting ready to climb down, and the ladder, she thought it was close to her, but it was against the wall. As she was about to swing her legs over, the ladder moves itself over. So she climbed down and came to my room, and I'm like, hell yeah, we got to check this out. So I go up to her room and I'm like mentally challenging. I'm like, come on, show yourself. At that time of my life, I was 20 years old. I believe I had the sensitivity of a rock, but I believed myself, capable of feeling a weird ghost vibe. And I felt nothing and nothing happened. So that night, and, I'm in bed and it's close to midnight, and my roommate, he's in the bottom bunk and he's already asleep. And I'm exhausted but restless. I just couldn't sleep, but I knew, like, I felt exhausted. And I propped myself on my elbows. And for some reason, I look to our doorway, and our rooms were tiny. And so our rooms are like just a square room and a sink with a mirror, and that's it. And our door handle turns real hard and fast, and the door whips open abruptly, maybe a foot, like forcefully, and stops forcefully. It's just like, and opens like it didn't like, open and then slowly swing open. It just whipped open instantly at about a foot wide. And I totally forgot about what happened with C. Like odd as that may sound. So I get down off the bed and I approach the door, and I'm like calling out to my friend S, a different S, because I thought, is it one of our friends? And of course it wasn't. And as I get a little closer to the door, I walk through that same icy air that I felt with the Glimmer Man. Now, but this happened before Glimmer Man, but it's the same. It was the same exact sensation. So those are the only two. It seems like a lot of my experiences happen in twos if they're not one-offers. So going through that icy air, and of course no one was there, and I turn around and my roommate's awake. I was like, dude, did you see that? He's like, yeah, the door just opened. I said, and nobody did it. And I tried to sound mysterious, but I was freaked out. So I get back into bed. And as I'm lying there, I hear like soft rapping on the wall by my head. And I'm like, T, is that you? He's like, no, I thought it was you. And I was like, is it? And he's like, no, he's on leave. I'm like, great. So T goes to sleep and I'm still wide awake. And then I start hearing this, like, it sounds like claws scratching the wall behind a refrigerator, just this. And I'm like, T, you getting this? And he's just snoring. I'm like, damn it, I'm on my own. So I cried myself to sleep and nothing happened. Now, C, the one who had the ladder thing, she used to party with the Seabees, the construction battalion. She, in front of a room full of people, like things would happen where the stereo would turn on, off, up, down. In front of a room full of people, like phenomena would happen. And so I wanted to check it out. So I go to her room to hang out because her room is a very active room. Her roommate was my ex-girlfriend, and there's a little bit like that's part of a lot of the things that happened there. So nothing happened, and it's about 3 a.m. And the second I was about to say I better get back to my room, this amber color light on my ex-girlfriend's side just appears and then disappears. Like it's like on and off. C didn't see it, but she was not in an angle that she could see it because their room was divided by these bookcases, and so she couldn't see it but I saw it clearly, and it was like it filled her that entire half of the room. No noise, it was just there and then gone. So I run on that side, and there's no source, like there's no candle, there's no light. So I felt satisfied. I was like, I got my phenomena. So as I'm walking back to my room, I had this sense that something was rushing up behind me and trying to envelop me. And it could have been my imagination, but it was like, it felt ultra creepy. And we had community bathrooms, so I had to go in there and pee. And I'm like, please don't attack me while I'm peeing. Please don't attack me while I'm peeing. And it didn't, thankfully. And I get back to my room, and I'm brushing my teeth, and I hear this swishing noise. They issued us parkas, being Iceland, and we had them hung on the door. And I heard as if the parkas were swinging back and forth. And so as I'm brushing my teeth, I look up in the mirror, and there's this enormous, it had to have been 7 feet tall, like black figure literally right behind me, like not even a foot behind me. And I saw that in the reflection of the mirror as I'm brushing my teeth. And I whip my head around and there's nothing there. And then I look back in the mirror and it's not there. So I brush faster. And at the time I was staying with a girl that I was with at the time her room was right across the hall from mine. So I dart in there and she's sleeping. And I get into bed and then I hear what sounds like someone walking through the room as if they were wearing socks. Like I hear these like light footfalls and I'm like, Elle, do you hear that? And she's like, I'm like, damn it, I'm on my own again. Then all of a sudden I hear this. And I'm like, now what's that? And then I was like, okay, that's just the heat. So next morning we wake up and Elle is yelling at me. She's like, why did you turn the heat up all the way? I was like, I didn't even touch the heat. So since Iceland has the geothermal heating, there was no lacking hot water there. And that's what also was used to heat the rooms. And anywhere past 2 notches and it's just, hot as balls, and it was cranked up to 4. And she didn't believe me. I was like, I don't touch the heat. And then I remembered that noise from that night. I was like, oh, I think they turned the heat up. So then, like, word kind of spreads throughout the barracks. People are seeing, of course, when she's partying with the CBs, like, stuff continually happens with them. And a few people would see, like, a little floating green ball that was nicknamed it Tinkerbell. I didn't see that. In fact, the only thing that I witnessed personally was the door opening and the amber light in C's room, the sensation that something was rushing behind me as I was heading back to my room, and then that like shadow figure that was like 7 foot tall. It didn't like look like a hat man or anything. It was just this big, tall figure literally right behind me. But then there were 2 women from my command that were reporting that they were sexually assaulted by something that they couldn't see. And then that's when the chaplain came to the barracks and was asking us questions about it. And I was among the people that he questioned. And he just asked me what have you heard? Have you experienced anything? And I told him pretty much what I told you. And so the two girls, I didn't know either of them well, and they also weren't really acquainted with each other. But the one, she was a radioman, and every morning I would have to get messages from her to give to our commanding officer. And so she would always, I'd ring the bell and she'd open up the little window. Every time she would be the one to give me the messages, she looked like she was not getting any sleep. Like I don't think I've ever seen anyone look more exhausted than she did. And so I think it did a number on her, as would be expected.
Now, these women, right? This was assaults on separate nights, the same night. Like, what do you know the situation there?
I know nothing about that.
Okay.
Except it was almost like passed around like in rumor fashion, but It got the chaplain's attention. The base chaplain, like it wasn't just like the command doesn't have a chaplain, but like this is, the Keflavik chaplain, and it didn't go anywhere. But then it gets a little more interesting. So now I mentioned C being roommates with my ex-girlfriend. So we dated a couple times. I wasn't a jerk. I just didn't take relationships seriously. I mean, I don't want to use my dad as an excuse, but I'm 20 at this time, and I probably wasn't the sanest person. I wasn't bad. I was just a bit of a jackass. So we broke up on bad terms the second time, and she started like talking all sorts of crap about me, and I won't get into those details. And I wasn't bothered by it. I was like, come on, I know I'm like a jackass, but I don't think I deserve that. And she comes in my office and she's like, I need to talk to you. I'm like, okay. She's like, come to the gee dunk room. And that means candy and Navy talk. I'm like, okay, let's go to the gee dunk room. And she said, did you put a spell on me? I said, excuse me? She's like, did you put a spell on me? I'm like, no, but I wish I had. And because she was like really smear my everything you can name. She said it about me. And so basically she said that she was in bed. She heard this claw scratching on her door, and then something pushed on her chest and gave a deep growl. And I was like, no, I have like literally nothing to do with any of that. And then a little bit of time down the road, so we'll call her T, she says this woman S said that I can't let you in my room. I can't have any contact with you. And she gave her like a little pouch of herbs to sprinkle by her door. Because I'll call her SU. SU said that whatever was attacking T came from me. I'm like, who the hell is SU? I've never heard of SU. So like we had a base directory, so everyone's listed. So you can't have an unlisted number. And it's just like a 4-digit number anyway. So I looked up SU and I called and I was like, this is Ray. I hear that you told T to not have any contact with me. She's like, that is right. And I said, I didn't do anything. Like and it turns out that SU was a pagan / witch, the wife of JU, who's a Navy guy that had nothing to do with our command. Like they were essentially strangers that lived in the married barracks. And I don't know how T got involved with them. So I was a little angry, like trying to like arrange a meeting to discuss it, because it felt unfair that I was being accused of this. And she would not allow me at her place. She wouldn't come to my room. And then she finally agreed to meet at a barracks that was like they were fixing it up. So there was no one living in there. So she and her husband and I met at this barracks and we had this discussion. And it was all pretty interesting. And it was friendly, like they were cool. And she was saying that even though I didn't formally send her anything, it still came from me. And then I was skeptical, but then she starts proving herself to be at least a decent psychic. And she was like, it was with you since you were a child and it scared you. But it's like, I think she said something like it's there to protect you. And it was then I think she started feeling better about me. And so her husband was also, I guess, a self-proclaimed witch. And he had a tarot deck and things got a little more like friendly and a little more relaxed. And they offered me a tarot reading. And I was like, yeah. And at the time, I don't think I was married at the time. The one that I was staying with the heat and stuff, we eventually got married. At the time, I was feeling like I couldn't trust her, like that if she wasn't cheating on me, it felt like she had the potential of cheating on me. And I was really battling with that in my mind. And so Jay, the husband, did a reading and I didn't tell what the question is. And he was just reading the cards as if he memorized them. And it wasn't a good reading at all. And he's just basically telling me what the cards mean. I'm like, I don't know what the hell you're saying. And then SU like kind of interrupts. She's like, he's asking about his wife, Jay. He's asking about his wife. I'm like, she is good. So we became acquaintances. And so she was friends with T and C from Louisville. So C and the CBs would sometimes hang out at S and J's house. And I would be there too. So she she was cool with me. And then all of a sudden, she stopped being cool with me. I saw her at a little mini mart, and I was like, "Hey, S, how you doing?" And she just like barely said anything and just kind of like got away from me. So I went to see him. Like, did I do something to like make S mad? And she said no. She just says you're very powerful, and it freaks her out. And at the time, I wasn't really practicing magic because I was trying to gain the courage to do it, but I was also scared that I would do things that I wouldn't be able to handle. So I was trying to work through those fears in order to, because I had this for, you know, years and years, the desire to practice magic. And I was too scared to really, I guess, practice it because I was afraid that I wouldn't be able to handle it if anything crazy happened. And so, like I said, I married that woman. We were in the married barracks, and that's where I was practicing mainly like lesser banishing, ritual of the pentagram. And I didn't know enough, so I was even scared of those rituals. I'm like, oh, and then I'd stop, and then I'd like try to get the courage again, and then I'd stop. So, because of what I had said about me not trusting her, it eventually caused our marriage to end. And so I left her because it was just a bad scene. So I moved back into the regular barracks, and she was living in the married barracks until she was going to fly back to the States. So I'm in the regular barracks. I get mail one day, and it's like a shoebox size wrapped in brown paper from a place called Papa Jim's, and it's addressed to me, Raymond White, Poae. I'm like, what the hell is Papa Jim's? And I go to my room, I open it, and it's a voodoo kit. There's like a Xerox copy of the order, and it's addressed to, or it's the person who ordered it was the barracks petty officer. We called him Boats because he was a boatswain's mate, and we'll call him AB. And none of it made sense because my name was nowhere on the order form. It was addressed to AB. So I go to Boats. I'm like, Boats, I got a package that was supposed to go to you. And he's like, what do you mean? So we go to my room. He's like, how the hell did you get it? I was like, I have no idea. And I'm thinking, because this dude was this older New Yorker guy. He was about to retire, just really laid back, just chill out, drink beer, smoke cigarettes, and shoot the shit. Just real cool, laid back guy. Not one thing about that guy would give you the indication that he practiced voodoo. And so I'm like, you do voodoo? And he says, you didn't know? And then I'm thinking, did we ever talk about it? I was like, we never talked about it. He said, but you didn't know? I'm like, how the hell would I know? And he said, I knew about you. And I was like, that's because I have weird books. He's like, no, when you checked in, that's why I said, hey, brother. I was like, that didn't sound out of the ordinary. Like, he's like, no, because I saw, I felt that in you. And I was like, well, I wasn't even practicing, And he's like, but I feel it in you. I'm like, all right, dude. So, and it was just strange. So then I was like asking, why do you have a voodoo kit? And I thought it had to do, I knew it had to do, well, he said it was with the spirit that's there. And I thought that it had to do with a lot of the Navy people, like about 12 that I know of, were practicing witches. And sometimes, and I've partaken with some ceremonies with them on and off. And I thought it had something to do with them. And he's like, no, this thing was here before any of them were here. This thing has been here like from the very beginning, and he's been battling it. And that's why he got the voodoo kit. So it's all very strange, especially the whole thing where I'm getting it. And my name's nowhere on on the order form, but it's on the brown paper that the address was on. So Boats is about to retire, and go back to, I think he was going to move back to Virginia. And he comes to my room and just to like say goodbye and stuff. And he's like, I describe you like coal, like he's talking to me. He says, sometimes you're glowing red hot and sometimes you're a dull black. You get started and then you stop. You start and then you stop. And that's exactly what I was experiencing, especially in the married barracks when I was trying to start the magic, but I was too scared to continue, so I would stop. And he described it to a T. And he made some Babe Ruth analogies, like there are so many Babe Ruths out there that never touched a bat. I didn't quite get that, but those were his words. And he said, I'm not always going to be there to give you a kick in the ass when you need it. You need to basically, you need to start practicing magic. And so he's about to leave. So he gets up and he says, you can always get in touch with me and you don't need a phone. And then he walks out of the door and then my lights go out. And which happens a lot in Iceland because of the wind. But when that would happen, the emergency lights in the hall would go on. And so I opened the door to see there was no emergency lights on. And then my lights flicker and turn back on. And then that was the last time I ever saw Boats because he left the next day. And that is the Iceland story.
There's a whole lot of good stuff going on there, huh?
Yeah, I'm probably forgetting a lot of it.
I mean, that's cool that he was like, but I called you brother because I could tell, I could see you. And you're like, oh, I didn't take it like that.
Yeah,
like, I didn't take it like
called
that.
Brother. I've been called Guy.
Yeah. Hey, Guy. People call each other brother, you know?
Yeah. It didn't seem,
yeah.
I was like, so if that was your call to me, brother, come on.
You could have winked or, like done some kind of a hand signal or something too.
Yeah, that could have been construed in a whole other way.
like the Illuminati symbol or something, like a triangle, like hands, or not that I'm saying you're Illuminati, or you know what I'm saying,
then,
like just
he could have done that and I wouldn't have known what it meant.
Oh, that's great. No, that is so fascinating. And it takes place in Iceland, which I'm fascinated by Iceland. I've always wanted to visit.
That is a cool, weird place.
I bet. Did you eat any of the Icelandic shark that they let sit out for months?
No, I loved the Icelandic hot dogs, which were lamb dogs.
Are you sure they weren't made from those sharks that they let sit out for months?
I hope so. I doubt it. I didn't.
But the hot dogs were good.
Oh, they were. Yeah, because they were weird because it wasn't like a ketchup and mustard thing. They would put these like deep fried onions, something called rumelade, and an Icelandic mustard are just. There's nothing like it. And every once in a while when I remember, I'm like, now with the internet, I want to get the ingredients and make them myself.
Now that you say that, the movie Fools Rush In with Matthew Perry and Selma Hayek, I remember that he was in the desert, here in Las Vegas, and she's like, well, what kind of food do you like? And he's like, I like raised papaya from New York City. So she had it flown in. And that's what crossed my mind. I'm like, I wonder if there's a service, Ray, where they can go pick up some of those lamb hot dogs from Iceland and bring them over to you.
If I remember correctly, it was all available. Like all of it's available. I just didn't follow through.
Right. Oh, that's cool.
So I imagine in another 7 months from now, I'll remember again and try again. And then I go through funny cycles of like, I better do this, that, and then I don't.
I do the same thing. Don't worry. See, but the good thing is if anyone ever wanted any of that shark, they wouldn't have to really pack that in anything because that's the whole point of the damn thing. Just slap it in a box.
I would hate to be the transporter.
Hopefully that would be labeled. Well, Ray, I cannot thank you enough for being willing to come on and spend all this time with me and chat about all of your experiences. Thank you so much for being willing.
Thank you. And I know I've commented, you truly are the best interviewer I've ever heard. And you are just entirely pleasant in every way. And I appreciate that.
Well, thank you, Ray. That's very kind of you to say. I don't know if I fully agree with that comment, but I do appreciate you saying that. Thank you so much.